Today we're talking all about organic pest control. Let's go. Hey friends, it's Kendall, your joyful farmer. Today we're talking about my favorite ways to manage specific pests organically. One of the number one questions I get is, how do you deal with pests in the garden? I have lots of great tips for you today. First, I'm going to talk a little bit about my pest management philosophy, and then I have an alphabetized list of specific pests and the ways that I control them in the garden. First of all, everybody has to make their own decisions about their gardens and their specific situations. I really like to use natural and organic methods that work with nature rather than against it. For example, I welcome all sorts of beneficial insects in my garden, like zipper spiders, wolf spiders, parasitic wasps, assassin bugs, praying mantises, toads, and of course pollinators. I try to avoid harming pollinators as much as possible because in so many cases they are necessary to help us for fruit production. The philosophy of my garden is it's a part of the ecosystem whether I like it or not, and so I really want to manage and steward that well. I also am kind of a lazy gardener. I really value my time, and so I want to use methods that are going to use as little time as possible and be as effective as possible. I want to do what is going to take the least amount of time and stress to prevent and fix problems. Basically, I want to implement practices here that really unlock the natural tendencies of the ecosystem and use that to my advantage to help me be more successful. I would much rather swim with the direction of the stream and use that momentum rather than go against it and battle upstream. So over the last few years, I've really tried to learn more and implement integrated pest management. For short, it's IPM. And basically with IPM, we identify and manage pests that are present and affecting our crops in a negative way. And pest populations are truly different every year, so we are constantly monitoring and evaluating and adjusting. But rather than using chemical controls, we really prioritize controls that are more preventative first, like crop rotation, introducing beneficial predators of specific species of insects, or physical barriers. We first will use mechanical controls like trapping or physical removal, or we'll sometimes spot treat with sprays that are more gentle but effective methods that are not harsh, toxic chemicals. If a population gets really bad, we'll then move to do a more widespread application of a repellent or an insecticide. And with insecticides, we prefer to use the ones that are naturally occurring, more biological controls that affect the specific target pest population without harming beneficial insects. So that's our philosophy around here and how we generally tend to work. Next up, I have my really great list of preferred methods for what I've found works with specific insect populations. These are all in alphabetical order, and I will put the names on the screen for you so that if you need to come back and reference this video, you can go back and easily find a specific insect that you're dealing with. So the first one is aphids. Aphids you can typically find on the underside of leaves, and they'll be in large numbers. They reproduce really quickly. So if you see an issue, it's good to deal with it pretty quickly. Natural predators of aphids are ladybugs and also lacewings, and there are others as well. But if you have a good population of ladybugs and lacewings around, you won't really have an aphid problem. But if you see a lot of aphids start to show up in large numbers, you do want to get rid of them. So a good way to physically remove them is by blasting kind of forceful water onto the undersides of the leaves. Just turn your hose up or your spray nozzle to a setting that's not going to destroy the leaves of your plants, but is forceful enough to knock those aphids off. Another thing you can do is use a solution like a little bit of Dawn soap mixed with water, or neem oil, Dawn and water, and a solution like that will also stop the aphids from continuing to reproduce and feed on your plants. Next up is cucumber beetles. Cucumber beetles are very much my nemesis. They like to feed on the leaves and stems of all kinds of cucurbits, so cucumbers, melons, and pumpkins. They carry a bacteria that causes bacterial wilt and can infect and destroy your plants. A preventative measure that I found works really well for cucumber beetles is beneficial nematodes. You just have to check and be sure that you get a strain of them that's going to work to attack the larva of the cucumber beetles. And it does that in the soil. So you want to apply beneficial nematodes to moist soil. And if you can do it during a rain shower, that's even better, because the beneficial nematodes swim around to move and travel, and they will infect the larvae of the cucumber beetles and take care of them for you. For us, that's an application that I like to do kind of in the middle of spring, and doing multiple applications, one every couple of months, is really helpful. If you have adult cucumber beetles that start to show up on your plants, you can start to do some mechanical removal. So one way I like to do this is with a jar of soapy water. I'll literally just get some water, put a little squirt of Dawn dish soap in it, and I will hold it underneath the leaves of the plants, kind of come in and scare the cucumber beetles into jumping right into the jar. For some reason, cucumber beetles, oftentimes, if they can't fly away easily, they'll just jump off of a leaf as a defense mechanism. So in this case, they jump right into the jar of soapy water and volunteer to die. If the cucumber beetle population starts to get so big that I'm having a hard time managing them all by mechanical removal, then I'll start to spray them with a more widespread application of a neem oil solution. And I'll put the recipe for that in the description below. But whenever I spray with a neem oil solution, I'll be sure to do it in the evening, kind of at sunset. And the reason for this is the pollinators don't tend to be out in the evening. They're not as active, because neem oil will be harmful to beneficial insects, including pollinators. So I'm really careful to apply that neem oil in the evenings. And when the numbers of cucumber beetles are really high, it's helpful to spray every day or every other day with neem oil, just to really try to keep the numbers down. For every adult cucumber beetle that you have, the more babies they're gonna have, and the more exponentially that population is gonna grow as the season progresses. Another thing I'll do with cucumber beetles is I will use my handy dandy dust buster to go out and vacuum them, just to catch them. It works really well. It's kind of like a fun game. You can go out and try to catch as many as you can. Just be sure that you have some sort of a cover over the end of a little vacuum, because if not, they will find their way out and then undo all of the hard work you did vacuuming them up. So I use saran wrap, or duct tape works well. Another idea for you for cucumber beetles is to plant a trap crop, something that they're really attracted to keep them away from the plants that you really want to produce well. And then you can spend more time spraying that trap crop rather than worrying about them being on other plants. I found that cucumber beetles are really attracted to Kajari melon plants. I planted a whole row last year, and that is what they were drawn to before any other plants. They went straight to the Kajari melon. Next is cutworms. So cutworms eat at the base of your plant, especially young seedlings. So if you see plants just sort of fall over and the base has been bitten, you probably have an issue with cutworms. To prevent them, you can use insect netting to prevent those moths from coming and laying eggs on your plants. And you can also use diatomaceous earth around the base of the plants to protect them. And if you see a cutworm, of course, you can pick it up and just physically remove it. Next is grasshoppers. I have absolutely dealt with grasshoppers over the past several years. So one way that you can prevent damage to your plants from grasshoppers is a kaolin clay barrier. If you find that there's a plant that your grasshoppers are really attracted to, you can mix 3 cups of kaolin clay with a gallon of water, and you can spray that on the foliage of the plants. Just make sure that you kind of get the foliage from all angles to get a good coating on it. And you do have to repeat that every week or two on the new growth. But it does prevent the grasshoppers from munching on the foliage. It makes it sort of undesirable for them, and they move on to something else. You can also apply diatomaceous earth to the foliage of your plants to keep the grasshoppers from eating the leaves, but you do have to reapply diatomaceous earth after rain. But I find that it works especially well on plants that are little seedlings that tend to get munched by lots of different critters when they're little. There used to be something called Nolo bait, which was a biological control for grasshoppers. Basically, you'd apply it, and the grasshoppers would get infected by it, and they would also infect each other, but it would only affect grasshoppers. So that really helped to reduce the grasshopper populations. But unfortunately, that product is no longer manufactured. For baby grasshoppers, I've found that Pyganic works well. It's a botanical insecticide that is made from something called pyrethrum, which comes from chrysanthemums. So it's naturally based and it works pretty well on the baby grasshoppers if you spray them, but it does not work on the adults. There's also mechanical removal of grasshoppers if you have smaller numbers, and that works well. You can support your garden with doing something like including a bird bath to encourage birds to come in and hang out in your garden, because birds are such great grasshopper catchers. Also, guinea fowl are really helpful to hang around to remove grasshoppers. They are great at catching them. Guineas are extremely fast. They are not damaging to garden plants like chickens oftentimes are. So if you can manage to have a little flock of guineas hanging around your garden and staying in the area, which is kind of the challenge of them, then they'll hang out and eat grasshoppers and really help take down the population for you. Another way to get rid of grasshoppers is hand-to-hand combat. So you can just get a pair of snippers or pruners or even scissors and just go after those grasshoppers with those. It works well, but that's just if you have the stomach for it. Not everybody does. It can be, however, very effective. Next up is hornworms. So there are these really large moths that are drawn to tomato plants. They'll lay their eggs on your tomato plants, and you will go out one day and half of the leaves will be gone from your plant because a hornworm has hatched and it is just taken over, and they can devour a plant very, very quickly. So to check for hornworms and just mechanically remove them, a really easy way to do that is at night with a black light. So if you go out and you shine that black light at night, the hornworms tend to glow, they're easier to see, and they're easier to just pick off and remove. You can also consider doing insect netting around your plants, and that'll be a physical barrier for those moths to prevent them from laying the hornworm eggs on your plants. There is something called BC, which is Bacillus thuringiensis, and that is a biological control for caterpillars of all sorts. But usually hornworms just show up one at a time, so applying something like BT would be a little bit of overkill, when really you could just go out and spot check for them every day or so. Next up is leaf-footed bugs. I do not like leaf-footed bugs. They feed on the fruit of plants and they cause blemishes and bruises, and they will basically ruin your fruit of your plants. That same soapy water mixture that we use for squash bug adults works just fine on leaf-footed bugs as well, and they fly quickly. So when you spot leaf-footed bugs that are landed and sitting still on your fruit or your leaves of your plant, it's really easy to just go in and spray them, and they will be no more. Another interesting note for you is that a trap crop for leaf-footed bugs could be straw flower. I have found that the leaf-footed bugs, before they even go to my tomatoes or my cucumbers or anything else, they are drawn to straw flower. So that's a really great place to look for those leaf-footed bugs in my garden. Next is moths or cabbage lopers. Moths lay their eggs on the underside of leaves, and the caterpillars, after they hatch, will eat the leaves. So if you see lots of little kind of random spots eaten out of your leaves, check the underside of them because there's probably some little caterpillars under there. Cabbage lopers tend to do the most damage to brassica plants. They're most attracted to things like kales, cabbage, Brussels sprouts, and things like that. There are some preventative measures that you can use for cabbage lopers and those moths. So one thing you can do is a physical barrier. You can put up insect netting over some hoops, and that will prevent those moths from coming in and laying their eggs on your leaves. Another thing that I discovered in the past and used and forgot to use this year is mustard plants. So you can plant mustard plants, and those cabbage moths are more attracted to those mustard plants than other brassicas. So they'll go there, lay their eggs there, and the cabbage lopers will destroy those plants before they get to other plants. Another thing that's really helpful is just to keep birds around. Birds are one of the main predators of little cabbage lopers and tiny caterpillars. So this year, because we have insect netting on the high tunnel, there are moths that are inside of the high tunnel and their population just keeps kind of cycling and they keep reproducing. In part, I think because the birds are not able to get in here and really take care of some of those little babies like they normally would. Once you see cabbage lopers present, you can spray BT, which is Bacillus thuringiensis, and it is that biological control which will attack the inner gut of the caterpillars and cause them to starve. And that really does work well on any brassicas. It's good as a preventative measure, and it's great when you see them show up. So if you see moths around, it can be good to just go ahead and start a routine of spraying that BT if you really want to be sure that the cabbage lopers don't damage your plants. But when you see the caterpillars or cabbage lopers start to show up, you can spray that Bacillus thuringiensis on the foliage of the plants. If you do it daily, that will continue to make sure that those babies don't turn into adults, and it'll help break the life cycle of all the moths. Next up is pill bugs. Pill bugs are actually really helpful in the garden. They help to eat dead plant matter, and they'll recycle those nutrients and feed the soil for you. So I don't like to completely get rid of pill bugs, but pill bugs can be sort of a pest because they will also eat seedlings and baby plants especially. Some things that I do for pill bugs is I will cut a potato in half, put the cut side down on the soil, and that will serve as a distraction for the pill bugs. The pill bugs will come and eat the potato and just kind of hang out under the potato. Another thing I'll do is I will sprinkle diatomaceous earth on the tops of the leaves and on the soil. Diatomaceous earth is kind of like little tiny particles of glass, so you have to be careful not to breathe it in when you apply it, but you make sure that it is on the foliage of the plants and at the base of the plant, and it'll prevent those pill bugs from coming near the plants. You do have to reapply diatomaceous earth after it rains or after you water, so that is one thing that's kind of a downside of it, but if you reapply it, it will really protect those little plants. I also trust the birds and toads and spiders to help manage the population of the pill bugs. Like I said, I don't want to get rid of the pill bugs completely because they are great helpers to my soil. But if you do want to eliminate the pill bugs altogether in a certain area, you can sprinkle diatomaceous earth on top of them and it will dry them out. All right, a couple more. We've got slugs. So slugs I don't typically deal with in North Texas in my area. We don't have prolonged amounts of rain and moisture and humidity enough to have a lot of slugs where I am. I don't have enough tree coverage to really have shaded areas that stay moist on my property. So I don't have a lot of slug issues. But my friends who do have slug issues swear by putting beer in a shallow dish, and that's a great trap for slugs. There's also something called Sluggo, or there's Sluggo Plus, which have iron phosphate or a combination of iron phosphate and spinosad in them, and that will help you to get rid of those slugs pretty quickly. Next is spider mites. I really hadn't had a huge issue with spider mites until this year inside of the high tunnel actually. Spider mites build webs and they will puncture the cell walls of plants to eat them. If you see little webs and you see tiny little red dots moving along those webs, that's spider mites. If you see them, you want to treat them pretty quickly because they do reproduce really fast. You can treat them with a soapy water mixture, or you can do a neem oil soap water combination, and that will knock them out. Spider mites will show up and start damaging your plants before you see the damage on your plants. So if you see spider mites somewhere, you want to spray the entire area, really just to prevent those spider mites from damaging the nearby plants from where you think the infestation is. They spread really, really quickly. This year we did learn a very valuable lesson on spider mites. So next year in the spring, before it gets really hot, I'm gonna make sure to get some lacewing eggs and put them in here so that I have a good population of lacewings to help deal with those spider mites as they start to emerge next spring. Next is squash bugs. No one likes squash bugs. It seems like they're everyone's nemesis. If you plant a summer squash plant, a yellow squash or a zucchini squash, they will show up. Squash bugs are really harmful because they will feed on the plant juices and the leaves of your plants. And they attack not only summer squash, but winter squash plants as well. So any pumpkins or butternut or spaghetti squash, they will come after it. Even if you do crop rotation, it tends to not help with squash bugs. They can fly pretty fast and they will find your squash plants. A couple of preventative things to help with squash bugs are to plant a trap crop and doing some companion planting. So using blue Hubbard squash as a trap crop really does work. The squash bugs will go to that blue Hubbard squash before they go to other squash plants. But that only distracts the squash bugs, and if you leave them unchecked, they'll continue to reproduce and their numbers will get larger. So after they're done with your blue Hubbard squash plants, they will move to other squash plants and there will be more of them. But planting that trap crop is a great way to kind of distract the squash bugs from your other more prized squash plants. And you can kind of deal with the pest population over in the trap crop before they get to your other squash that you want to harvest from. Another preventative that I have found does repel squash bugs, at least for a while, is radish. So if you plant radishes around the plants that you really want to grow and harvest from, the squash bugs will sort of turn their nose up at that and go to different plants. Unless those are the last plants left, then radishes or no radishes, they will come after your squash plants. But it does work for a while and that can help. Another thing you can try is applying kaolin clay to your squash leaves. You do have to do that frequently and do it to all sides of the foliage, but that can create a barrier that the squash bugs don't like as well. So those are some preventative methods for squash bugs, but the squash bugs will show up to your plants. So the way that we've been dealing with squash bugs this year is we have vertically trellised some of the zucchini plants that I have. That's really helped to be able to visually check for adult squash bugs, baby squash bugs, and also the eggs that they lay underneath the leaves. The easiest way of dealing with the adult and baby squash bugs is an insecticidal soap spray. So the easiest and most organic method that I've found is just getting a spray bottle with water, adding a squirt of Castile soap. I like to use the peppermint Castile soap because it smells good, but you add that to a spray bottle, set it on a setting that is able to easily target and kind of soak those adult or baby squash bugs, and you just go around and you spray them. 1 or 2 sprays soak them really good and they will suffocate pretty quickly. You do have to remove the eggs as well. So the eggs will show up as they're adults. They will be constantly laying eggs. I will pinch off the parts of the leaves that have the eggs on them. And I like to keep a little jar or bucket of soapy water around so that I can put the eggs into that jar of soapy water, and they're guaranteed to, even if they do hatch, they're hatching in the soapy water and they're not going to live. The adults and the babies are really good at hiding on leaves and stems. So one trick that you can use is just getting your hose and spraying the plant with water, and that'll help those bugs to kind of come to the surface and also kind of scatter on the ground so that you can really see them and spot them and get them with the spray bottle of soapy water more easily. But being diligent and checking every day and making sure to get the babies, adults, and eggs is really key to the squash bug battle. If you have too many plants to be able to feasibly do that every day, you may lose the battle with squash bugs. But if you keep the number of plants small enough that you can manage to go out there and check every day and be diligent about it, it really is the battle that you can win. Luke fell asleep in my lap. He's being really cute right now. So those are all of my organic, natural pest control tips. Everything I've learned so far, and that works really well for me. You might want to bookmark this video so that you can come back and reference when you have certain pest populations emerging in your garden. But I hope it'll be helpful for you. But thank you for joining us today. We wish you joy on your journey, and I'll see you next time. Oh my goodness. Yeah. Cacti.